Hi, I'm Clara. On Christmas Eve, I handed a hot meal to a cold, shivering veteran outside our house, and my mother screamed that I was embarrassing the family. She threw me out into the snow. No coat, no warning, just the words, "You made your choice. Go sleep with your strays." So I did. I curled up on our frozen porch with nothing but my father's old jacket and silence. But when morning came, there were 200 soldiers standing outside, and one of them held something. That would change everything. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where from? Drop it in the comments. I read every word. The air had that brittle kind of cold where even the wind felt sharp, like it could slice through skin. Snow hadn't started yet, but the sky promised it soon would. Gray, heavy, pressing low. I stood at the kitchen counter, adjusting the parsley on deviled eggs for the third time, though no one would notice either way. Mom, Lucinda, floated past me, perfect as always. Her heels didn't even click against the tile. "Napkins," she said, not looking at me. "Fold them diagonally, not the lazy squares." I swallowed the sigh. Got it. The dining room shimmered, silver-rimmed plates, crystal glasses, candles flickering just enough to seem elegant but not romantic. It was her annual Christmas Eve gathering. Doctors, board members, that one judge who never smiled, and of course my siblings, Valerie the attorney and Dean the surgeon, both with spouses straight out of catalog ads. Everyone had arrived on time, everyone except me, who'd been in the kitchen since 2 p.m., helping with roast prep. No one mentioned that. "Clara, don't slouch." Her voice cut through the dining room as I set the water glasses. "You look like you're hiding something." I straightened. "Just tired." She turned. "Well, maybe if you got more than 4 hours of sleep working those night shifts with junkies and drunks?" I didn't answer. No point. She never asked about the people I cared for, only reminded me I'd failed to remarry, failed to impress, failed to make her proud. The guests sipped wine and laughed in that rehearsed way polished people do. I took my place at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door, invisible as ever. That's when I saw him. Through the window, beyond the lit archway and the garlands, sat a man beneath the arbor in our front yard. He was older, bundled in a torn navy coat, shoulders hunched against the cold. His left leg stuck out awkwardly, like it wouldn't bend right. But what struck me was how he sat, straight spine, hands folded in his lap like a soldier waiting for orders. Still, respectful, dignified. I looked around the table. Not one person noticed, not one pause in conversation. Quietly, I got up and stepped into the kitchen. The oven's warmth hit me like a memory. I packed some sliced ham, green beans, and a bit of casserole into a small tin. From the candy jar, I slipped in one peppermint. Then I wrapped the lid tight. I crossed the living room quickly and opened the front door. The cold met me head on, but I ignored it. Stepping off the porch, I walked to the man. "Merry Christmas, sir," I said softly, kneeling to place the box beside him. "It's not much, but it's hot." He looked at me, eyes clear under the porch light. Not glassy, not desperate, just tired. He gave a small nod. "Ma'am?" And that's when I felt it, that stare. From the window, I turned. There, behind the frost-laced glass, stood my mother. Her jaw was clenched, arms crossed, her eyes didn't blink. I rose and walked back inside. The music had stopped. No conversation, just the sound of my heels tapping the hardwood floor. Everyone stared. My siblings looked confused. Mom was already standing. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with a practiced calm, "let's all take a moment to acknowledge my daughter, feeding a filthy drunk, on my porch, during our Christmas Eve dinner." I froze. "He's not drunk. He's a veteran." Her voice snapped, sharp enough to draw blood. "Then he should act like one, not loiter like some stray animal. Mom, he's—" She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Get out of my house, Clara." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Everyone just watched. Valerie bit her lip. Dean looked down at his plate. Not one word, not one hand reached out. "Mom, I don't have my coat or my phone." She didn't even flinch. You made your choice." I stood there, heartbeat loud in my ears, until I heard the sound. The door behind me shutting, the click of the lock. I was outside. No coat, no gloves, just a cardigan over my dress. The wind had picked up. Snowflakes landed on my skin like tiny knives. I sat on the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around my knees. My breath came out in bursts of fog. Inside, the piano started again. I looked across the street. The man was still there, but he hadn't opened the tin. He held it gently, like it mattered. Then slowly, he brought his hand to his brow. A salute. And then he stood. Limping, he walked into the shadows, swallowed by snow. Behind me, through the window, someone laughed, but all I heard was the silence that followed his footsteps. The first sound that reached me wasn't the birds or wind, but boots. Heavy, deliberate, crisp on the ice-packed road, dozens of them. At first I thought I was dreaming. I was curled tight on the far edge of the porch, my cardigan crusted with frost, my cheeks stinging and stiff. My legs had long gone numb. Then came the low hum of engines, multiple, big ones, and that unmistakable hush that follows a crowd holding its breath. I opened my eyes. Across the street, flanked by fresh snowbanks, stood two perfect lines of uniformed men and women, stretching the entire length of our neighborhood block. Silent, motionless, each of them in full dress blues, the stars on their shoulders glinting in the early light. 4 officers at the front held a long white banner between them, firm and proud. "No veteran stands alone." I blinked, still not sure if I was awake. My teeth chattered as I pushed myself upright, one hand gripping the porch rail for balance. The pain in my joints told me I was alive. Barely. Before I could speak, one of the officers stepped forward. He was tall, solid, and carried himself with the kind of quiet gravity that demanded attention, a silver eagle on his shoulder. He removed his cap slowly and held it over his heart. "Miss Clara?" he said gently. "I'm Colonel James Whitman." I managed a nod, though my vision blurred from cold and disbelief. He knelt beside me, draping his own heavy wool coat over my shoulders. "We've been looking for him for years," he said. "The man you helped last night. That was Staff Sergeant Matthew Hale. Afghanistan, 3 tours. Decorated. Disappeared 2 years ago." I looked down the street searching for him. "He reached out to me for the first time since his discharge," the colonel added. "Called from a payphone around midnight. Said he didn't know why he picked that moment. Just said, 'Someone reminded me I'm still human.'" My chest tightened. My throat burned. All I'd done was hand him a warm meal and a peppermint. Colonel Whitman helped me to my feet. My legs shook as I stood, but I steadied myself. Not a single soldier moved. Every face looked straight ahead, stoic, respectful. Neighbors were starting to open their doors. One woman down the block clutched her phone to her chest, mouth agape. A child whispered, "Are they here for her?" That's when the door behind me creaked open. Lucinda stood in the doorway, bathrobe cinched tight, lips painted and freshly glossed even at that hour. She blinked in surprise, taking in the scene before her, the banner, the soldiers, me in a military coat. "Oh, my," she said, voice lifted an octave too high. "Well, what a turnout. We've always supported our veterans, of course. I host the charity tea every—" Colonel Whitman didn't raise his voice, but the effect of his words silenced her instantly. "Ma'am," he said with a look that cut through satin and bone, "we're not here for you. Last night, the only person on this property who showed dignity to a brother in arms was her." He gestured toward me. Lucinda froze. Her eyes flicked to the neighbors now gathered on their porches. Phones were raised. Whispers had begun. "Oh, please," she huffed, face stiffening. "This is just some grand misunderstanding." But it wasn't, and everyone could see that. One soldier broke rank and stepped forward, a younger man, maybe late 20s. He carried a small, hard-shell case in both hands and approached with reverence. "Miss Clara," he said, "Sergeant Hale wanted you to have this." I took it with trembling fingers. It was light, but my hands could barely keep steady. Inside, a precisely folded American flag. Beneath it, a faded photograph, two soldiers shoulder to shoulder in the desert sun. One of them was Hale, the other was my father. I gasped softly. My fingers brushed over the image, and I felt that pull in my chest again, grief, pride, and something else that had been dormant for years. There was also a note, folded neatly on top of the flag. I opened it with care. "You reminded me of the man who once saved me. Your father. Thank you for reminding me who I was. Matthew Hale." I covered my mouth. Not from pain, but from the wave of relief I hadn't expected. The kind that comes when you realize, for the first time, you weren't wrong for caring. Lucinda stepped closer, trying to peer over my shoulder. "Well, isn't that touching?" she muttered, trying to keep composure. "But let's not make a spectacle. People exaggerate." "I never exaggerated," I said quietly. "I was just invisible. Until now." Colonel Whitman turned toward the formation. "Dismissed." The soldiers saluted in unison, then broke formation with graceful precision. Several neighbors clapped. Someone down the street shouted, "God bless you, Clara." My knees nearly gave out. As the line began to dissolve into pairs and vehicles, a few approached me directly to shake my hand, offer a nod, or simply say, "Thank you for seeing him." The last to leave was the colonel. He paused before stepping into his jeep. "You made more of a difference than you'll ever know." I didn't have words. I simply nodded, still holding the case to my chest like it might fly away. And that's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. A young woman in a navy peacoat, laminated badge clipped to her scarf, was standing there. "Ma'am," she said gently, "do you have a moment to speak for NBC?" I turned slowly, still cradling the black case in my arms, the cold biting at my cheeks. A woman with a press badge and a wind-whipped scarf stood there, holding out a microphone. "Ma'am, do you have a moment to speak for NBC?" People were still murmuring on the sidewalk, phones held high, some crying quietly, others just stunned. Behind me, the banner still hung between the officers. "No veteran stands alone." I wasn't even sure I'd stood up yet, but something in me nodded before I realized it. The reporter leaned in. "Why did you give him that meal last night?" I blinked. The answer should have been simple, but my throat tightened. My breath clouded in the air, and my voice, when it finally came, was hoarse but steady. "Because everyone deserves to be seen, especially someone who's served and been forgotten." I didn't have a speech. I didn't need one. My words landed like a stone dropped into still water. I didn't even finish the interview. My legs gave out a little, and one of the soldiers stepped forward to steady me. The reporter gently touched my arm and said, "Thank you. That's all we needed." By mid-morning, the street had cleared. The formation dissolved quietly, like a dream fading with sunrise. I stayed on the porch, still in that borrowed military coat, still holding that case. Mama hadn't come outside again. I don't know who uploaded the clip first. Might have been the neighbor kid. But it spread fast, like prairie fire in a dry summer. Within hours, my phone buzzed nonstop. At first, I thought it was just local folks. Then I saw a message from someone in Boise, then Pittsburgh, then Anchorage, all saying some version of the same thing. "We see you. Thank you." Someone on Twitter started the hashtag #FeedWithDignity, and it caught on like nothing I'd ever seen. My name, my face, that quiet line I'd said, was suddenly everywhere. There was a side-by-side photo. Me kneeling with the soldier's coat wrapped around me, and Mama peeking out from behind the lace curtains with a scowl. The caption read, "America, choose your side." That one hit hardest. I wasn't used to being on any side, let alone the right one. Local radio called that afternoon. A veteran shelter in Montana asked if they could quote my interview on their homepage. An advocacy group reposted the footage with subtitles in 4 languages. Donations started flowing into shelters across the country. And through it all, my mother said nothing. Not until that evening. I'd just come in to grab my duffel bag, planning to stay the night at a friend's before figuring out my next steps, when her voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You've made a circus out of this family, Clara." I turned slowly. She stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded tight. Her robe was pristine, her lipstick redder than usual. "You think you're some hero now? Feeding strays and calling the news?" "I didn't call anyone," I said, voice low. She scoffed. "Don't act innocent. You let them film you. You knew exactly what would happen. Now look, people are laughing. The McGees called to check in. You know what that means." I didn't reply. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger. "You embarrass this family. You humiliated me." Behind her, I saw movement. My older sister, Liv, standing by the stairs, her mouth pressed in a thin line. Then my younger brother, Nate, appeared behind her. He didn't say a word, but the way he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity, it was resentment. "You're always chasing attention, Clara," he muttered. "You never know your place." I blinked. "My place?" He shrugged. "This is just like when you joined that protest back in college. And when you posted about Dad's drinking, you always need to be the center of something." My breath caught. "That's not fair." "Life's not fair," Mama snapped. "And right now, you're making ours harder." I nodded slowly, heart thudding. Then I walked upstairs without another word. I didn't cry. I folded my shirts neatly, slid my few books into a grocery bag, packed slowly, deliberately, like it mattered. Because it did. When I zipped the duffel and grabbed my coat, I glanced once around the room. I'd spent more than half my life in that space, dreaming, healing, hiding. I wasn't hiding anymore. I had just made it to the front steps when I heard the rumble. A sleek, black SUV pulled up to the curb. The passenger door opened and a tall woman stepped out, crisp uniform, silver insignia, and an air of calm command. She looked up at me, then smiled warmly. "Clara, I'm Lieutenant Commander Ria Garcia." I stepped forward, cautious. "Yes?" She extended her hand. "I'm with the National Women Veterans Alliance. We saw the footage. We'd like to honor you at our winter banquet this Friday. Front table. We've arranged everything. Travel, lodging, just say yes." I stared at her, at the car, at her uniform. My fingers curled tightly around the strap of my bag. "You want me there?" She nodded. "Front and center." Something fluttered in my chest, something like disbelief but softer, rounder, like belonging. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I nodded, slowly, firmly, and just as I turned toward the SUV, my mother's voice rang out from the porch behind me. "If you leave now, don't come back." I didn't stop. Not when Lucinda's voice cracked through the cold evening air. Not when her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I just kept walking toward the SUV, my shoes crunching on the gravel, the hem of my coat brushing my ankles. Lieutenant Commander Ria Garcia didn't flinch. She simply opened the door, held it like a quiet invitation, and waited for me to get in. The ride to D.C. took hours. We didn't speak much, just exchanged polite sentences and glances. I stared out the window, watching as farmland gave way to streetlights, silence giving way to city hum. Somewhere between the second toll booth and a diner lit up like a postcard, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. That night, they put me in a modest hotel just a block from the event hall. The bed was too big for one person, but the sheets were warm, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without flinching. By morning, I had one suitcase, brushed hair, and a navy blue dress that still carried faint mothball scent from my closet. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You belong." The banquet hall was something out of a movie. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and rows upon rows of round tables covered in crisp white linens and silverware so polished it looked like liquid light. The air carried the faint scent of pine and strong coffee. People in dress uniforms stood in small clusters, laughing gently, nodding to one another in quiet respect. Every shoulder bore symbols, stripes, medals, service pins. And here I was, Clara Holt, the invisible daughter from a porch in Virginia, being escorted into this world like I had earned a seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Clara Holt," someone announced over the microphone. Heads turned. And suddenly I wasn't the youngest daughter anymore. I was someone with a name, someone with a reason to be there. They seated me between a woman who lost her son in Iraq and a quiet man in his 70s with a Medal of Honor clipped to his jacket. He simply reached over, shook my hand, and said, "We saw what you did. Good on you." I blinked, nodded, held back tears. Then the MC returned to the mic. "Tonight we honor not just service, but the everyday courage that keeps hope alive. With that, we invite Sergeant Wesley Grant." The room went still, and from the side doors came the man I'd once handed a hot meal to in the dark, clean-shaven now in dress blues, his posture tall but cautious. He took the podium, voice steady. "My name is Wesley Grant. I served 12 years. After my discharge, I lost myself. I was presumed missing, but the truth is, I didn't want to be found." A beat of silence. Until one night, cold and hungry, I stood outside a house. I'd lost faith in people, in myself, and then a woman walked out, not with pity, not with a lecture, but with food. She didn't ask who I was. She just looked me in the eye and said, "You deserve to be seen." Gasps rippled through the room. "She saved my life that night," he continued, voice cracking. "I was one decision away from disappearing forever, but she gave me a reason to come back." I covered my mouth. My breath caught somewhere between shame and awe. The room stood in silence, not out of awkwardness but reverence. And all I could think was, that night I had no plan. I wasn't trying to be noble. I just acted. And now, that action sat across from me in pressed uniform, breathing, alive. They gave him a standing ovation, but as he stepped off the stage, he came to my table and, without fanfare, saluted me. Back in the hotel that night, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my dress, shoes kicked off, hair loose around my shoulders. A knock at the door made me jump. I opened it expecting a staffer, maybe a note from the banquet committee. Instead, it was a man in a delivery cap, handing me a tabloid envelope. I thanked him and closed the door, then sat, tore the seal. The headline read, "Porch Princess or Publicity Stunt?" And there she was, Lucinda, her photo posed, lips pursed, pearls around her neck like armor. "She's always had a flair for the dramatic," the quote read. "Clara never knew her place. She's always needed attention, and now she's using the homeless to get it." They printed a blurry shot of me sitting on our front steps wrapped in a blanket. The caption said, "Clara Holt, self-styled savior or social climber." The article was vicious, slippery, full of half-truths and twisting of motives, and worse, one of my brothers had chimed in anonymously, "She's always been a little too much." I let the paper fall from my hands. That old gnawing voice began to stir again. Maybe I am too much. Maybe Lucinda's right. Maybe none of this is real, and I'm still just the girl who didn't fit at Sunday dinners. Then, another knock. This time, a hotel attendant slid an envelope under the door. No name, just a seal. I opened it. Inside, an official letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They invited me to join the Civil Outreach Committee, representing voices of those who've supported soldiers on American soil. They called me a bridge of empathy between civilians and veterans. I read the letter twice. Then again, no cameras, no spotlight, just service. I folded the paper, slipped it into my purse, and looked out the window. DC lights blinked in the distance, quiet and steady. I whispered to myself, "Then let's begin." I tucked the letter into my purse and slowly zipped it shut, letting the soft rasp of the zipper ground me. The hum of the hotel radiator filled the silence as I stared at the muted television screen, where the news ran a looping segment about military families and the rising support for veterans' mental health. I wasn't even in the frame. Not yet. The next morning, I awoke to the buzz of my phone dancing across the nightstand. At first, I ignored it, until I saw the flood of messages. Names I hadn't heard in years, news anchors tagging me, links shared with captions like, "Is this her?" I sat up and clicked the top video. It was Wesley, in uniform, standing tall, his voice steady yet raw. "This woman," he said, nodding toward a framed photo of us someone had taken at the ceremony. gave me the moment that kept me alive long enough to come home. The comment section was ablaze. Who is she? She saved a hero. We need more Claras in this world. But it wasn't just online. By lunchtime, my cousin from Ohio called to say she saw Lucinda on television. She's on the porch with reporters, crying, saying you're deeply loved but emotionally fragile. I opened the live stream and there she was, standing where she'd once thrown my coat like trash, now draped in a pastel cardigan, dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was the one abandoned. We never wanted this to get out of hand, she sniffled to the camera. Clara is dramatic, but she's family. We just didn't want her to be hurt. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat tightened. Lucinda was rewriting the story again, and this time, the whole country was watching. The next day, before the sun broke through the clouds, I parked 3 blocks from the house I used to call home. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed to see it one last time before I cut the final string. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed the silence wasn't empty. It was full, lined with footsteps and the sound of quiet purpose. Down the street, they came. Dozens, then hundreds. Veterans in uniform, retirees in caps, some limping, others pushing walkers, each one holding something, flags, signs, medals, and one by one, they gathered around my childhood home. No yelling, no chants, just a circle of presence, stronger than any protest I'd ever seen. A man in a marine jacket stepped forward and laid a folded coat on the porch steps, then stood back, saluting. My knees gave out right there on the sidewalk. I crouched behind a mailbox, tears flooding my cheeks, not from shame this time, not from grief. It was like something in me cracked open, and all the years of being invisible began pouring out. Someone nearby whispered, "This is the Porchlight Rebellion." I looked up. A young girl, maybe 10, tiptoed through the veterans and gently placed a card beside the coat. In purple marker, it read, "Thank you for seeing the invisible." Behind me, I heard a neighbor, Mrs. Green, who used to pull her shades shut when I walked past, step outside and offer a tray of hot coffee. Soon others followed. Someone opened their garage to pass out blankets. Another strung white lights across their fence. This was not about me anymore. It had become bigger than me. Back across the street, I stayed hidden as long as I could, until someone spotted me. I was greeted with nothing more than a nod from a Navy vet, a silent hand on my shoulder from a woman in fatigues, and the kind of eye contact that says, "We know." By dusk, the news vans were back, but not for Lucinda this time. The cameras turned instead to the veterans, to the folded coat, to the card left by a child. The porch that once told me I didn't belong was now covered with symbols that shouted the opposite. I left before the interviews began. I didn't need a mic. The truth had spoken for itself. The next evening, Lucinda stood in the same spot again, but this time no reporters asked for her version. They were there for a letter that had just arrived, hand-delivered by a congressional staffer. From the distance I could see her lips move as she read it, her fingers trembling, her face drained of color. The letter outlined a formal inquiry, allegations of emotional neglect, witness testimonies pending, civil rights attorneys attached. Terms like intentional infliction and psychological harm filled the page in sharp legal print. Lucinda gripped the doorframe for balance, looking out across a street that no longer whispered in her favor. No one rushed to console her, no neighbors stepped up. The only people on that porch now were the ones who had come for truth, and stayed for justice. That night, back at my small apartment, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. Outside, snow floated past like slow-falling ash. I whispered into the silence, "For those who stood when I was thrown out." I didn't have a porch anymore. Not like the old one with the cracked white railings and fake flower pots my mother used to arrange every June. Now it was just a narrow landing above the bookstore, 2 rusted chairs, and a railing where I taped a glass candle holder. Each night since the veterans gathered, I lit the same white candle. No announcements, no photos, just a flame in the window, like we used to do when soldiers were missing in action. In our house, my father never let a night pass during his deployment without a candle in the window. Even when my mother rolled her eyes and said, "He's not lost, Clara. He's overseas," he would say softly, "And even overseas can feel like being lost." The bookstore below closed at 7. After that, the street quieted down to almost nothing, just the occasional passing car and the sound of the old traffic light clicking through its cycle. I would sit beside the candle with a cup of chamomile tea and look out, and some nights, there were footsteps. It started as a note slipped beneath my door. Just a folded napkin with "Thank you for standing" written in blocky pen. Then another, "You reminded me of my daughter." And then, "My wife and I both served. We cried for you." No names, just words and kindness and ink. One envelope was sealed with a sticker from a retirement center in Ohio. Inside, a shaky hand had written, "Your silence spoke louder than their cruelty. You gave us back something we lost, dignity." I didn't post about them, didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. Something was building, and it wasn't loud. It was solid, quiet, like bricks in a wall nobody saw coming. Then, one morning, it arrived. It was cold, not snowing, but the air bit through even my thickest sweater. I stepped outside with my thermos and saw it there, folded neatly on the top step. The coat. The same one from that night. I knew it by the stitching on the sleeve and the frayed corner by the pocket. But this one was clean, brushed, restitched. Someone had taken care to mend every tear. I reached for it slowly, like it might disappear. When I picked it up, it had weight. Not just the fabric, but what it held. Inside the left breast pocket was a small silver pin, cool against my fingers. It read, "Stand in honor, even when they shut the door." I sat down right there on the steps and held the coat in my lap like a memory that had come home. It didn't need explanation. Someone had remembered. Someone knew. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just carried it back inside, hung it on the hook by my door, and stood for a long time looking at it. That afternoon, I opened my old laptop and began to write. Not a blog, not a thread, just a document. My story. Not for revenge, not to go viral, just truth. The Christmas night, the porch, the neighbors' windows, the silence from my mother, the years before that, the long ache of never being enough unless I complied, smiled, gave in. For once, I wrote it like I wasn't scared someone might read it. A few days later, I got an email. The name was unfamiliar, Daniel L. Cho, from a small veteran-run publication called Sentinel Voices. He said he'd heard about the coat, about the candle, and would I be willing to talk? I replied cautiously. I didn't want a photo shoot or dramatization. He understood. He wrote back, "Just a recorder, just your words. We don't clean up the truth." We met at the bookstore downstairs after hours. The owner, Gary, let us use the back office. No cameras, just Daniel, a notebook, and a small recorder. He didn't interrupt much. He just let me talk. I told him about the porch, about Lucinda's voice behind the locked door that night saying, "She's trying to manipulate us with pity." I told him about the casseroles I cooked every Sunday for years, hoping someone would say thank you. About the family photos where I was either cropped out or holding the camera. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't exaggerate either. And when I stopped, Daniel just nodded and said, "We'll title it, Thrown Out for Kindness and Still Standing." Sound good? I whispered, "Yes." The story went up 3 days later, quietly. No push notifications, no ads, just words. But something about the honesty lit a fire. Veteran groups reposted it. Widow communities shared it with captions like, This is what we felt but couldn't say." I started getting letters again. One was from a woman in Kansas who'd been locked out by her son after she refused to co-sign a loan for his 3rd DUI. She wrote, "Your porch was my front lawn. Thank you for holding the light." Then came the shift. Lucinda had RSVP'd to a local gala supporting a veterans' art initiative. She must have assumed her face still carried weight in the community, but the next morning, someone forwarded me a screenshot. "We apologize, Mrs. Whitaker. In light of recent community feedback, your invitation has been rescinded. Soon after, a board member from her precious social club stepped down, citing ethical misalignment. Donations stopped coming in for the brunch fundraiser she hosted every year. Sponsors quietly pulled out. Even the neighbor who used to hand-deliver her holiday poinsettias now left the porch empty. Lucinda didn't make a scene. That wasn't her way. But I knew. She was beginning to feel what she once made me feel. Invisible, dismissed, and I didn't gloat. I didn't clap back. That night, after brushing my teeth and making a cup of tea, I stepped outside into the cold. I placed the coat around my shoulders, lit the candle, and stood in silence. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to open a door. I was home. Then, just as I turned to go back inside, I saw the envelope. No return address. Just my name. The handwriting looked familiar, but blurred by time. I opened it slowly, cautiously, and there it was. A letter from someone I hadn't heard from in decades. A man who'd once gone missing in the fog of war. The night air held a gentle hush. I had just extinguished the candle by my window when the sound of paper brushing metal caught my attention. A soft thud from the mailbox at the foot of the stairs. Normally I'd leave it for the morning. But something nudged me that night. Maybe it was the way the flame had flickered just before I blew it out, like it was pointing me towards something more. I made my way down, one hand trailing the wall for balance, the other clutching the shawl around my shoulders. The envelope resting inside the mailbox was thick, the edges worn. No stamp, no return address, just my name, Clara Hastings, written in a steady, deliberate hand. Back upstairs, I set the envelope on the kitchen table beside a chipped mug of tea gone cold. For a long while, I simply looked at it. There's a certain weight to an envelope that doesn't come from paper alone. Some letters carry a pulse. I opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten, not typed. The penmanship was tight but practiced, and the opening line hit me like a whisper from the past. You don't know me, but I saw you that night. I paused, my breath catching. My fingers tightened around the edges of the page. Christmas Eve, on the corner of Ashby and 9th, you knelt beside that man in the snow while everyone else walked by. I was across the street, hiding in shadow, watching. I felt my spine stiffen. I didn't speak then. I couldn't. My name is Samuel Monroe. I served in the 5th Marine Regiment. I came back to nothing, lost my job, then my home. I was trying to make peace with my kids, but they'd moved on, said I'd done enough damage. I believed them. He continued, line after line, unfolding his story with the painful grace of someone who's had too long to think and too little chance to be heard. Samuel had seen everything, the shame, the coat, my mother's words slicing through the air like a knife, my silence. He described it all with the kind of detail only someone who lived on the outside looking in could recall. Oh, that night I'd planned to walk into the river. Not out of pain, but emptiness. And then I saw you. Not just what you did, but how you did it. You weren't crying. You weren't begging. You just did the right thing, even while the world tried to humiliate you for it. Tears pooled at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. You reminded me of who I used to be. You reminded me that dignity doesn't come from how others treat us, but from how we treat others, even when no one's watching. I folded the letter gently, pressing it to my chest for a moment before setting it aside. But something else had slipped from the envelope, an old map, creased and soft at the edges, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. A red star was drawn on it, just outside the city near the old quarry road. Next to it, a single sentence in Samuel's handwriting, "Come see what you helped build." The next morning, I packed a simple lunch, slipped on the restored army coat, and tucked the letter inside its breast pocket. I boarded the bus that headed out past the city limits, watching familiar streets give way to empty lots and tree lines. The address led me to a modest building tucked beneath a ridge of pines. No sign, just a gravel path and a small brass plaque by the door. I walked closer, my breath caught. This house stands because one woman refused to shut the door. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my hand touched the plaque. The door creaked open, and a woman, early 60s salt and pepper braid, eyes kind but sharp, stepped out. "You must be Clara," she said, like she'd been expecting me. Inside, the space was simple but warm: wooden beams, worn rugs, the faint scent of cedar and coffee. Veterans milled about in quiet conversation or sat near the fireplace reading. No one asked questions. No one stared. It felt like a place where every part of you could walk in together: your past, your pain, your dignity. "Samuel doesn't come around much," the woman explained as we walked, "but he sends letters, and he told us if you ever showed up, to take you to the wall." She led me down a hallway and turned into a room with tall ceilings and soft light filtering through stained glass. One entire wall was covered in portraits: paintings, sketches, photographs of veterans, their families, and people I imagined had helped this place become what it was. And then I saw it, right in the center, a painting of me, kneeling in the snow, the old army coat wrapped around the man I'd helped. A street lamp glowed above, casting soft light around us like a quiet benediction. I could see my breath in the cold night air, and somehow, even in paint, my hands looked both fragile and unshakable. Below it, a simple plaque: "Courage does not need a crowd, just conviction." I touched the frame and felt the tremble in my fingertips. I hadn't cried when my mother turned her back. I hadn't cried when I lay awake under that coat. But there, standing before that wall, I let myself feel it all. Not pain, not even pride, just something deeper, like the world had whispered, "We saw you." I stayed a while, talked with the volunteers, shared coffee and memories with a man who used to be a sergeant and now taught woodworking to kids. When I finally stood to leave, the woman at the door handed me a folded piece of paper. "Samuel called ahead," she said with a smile. "He said you'd want to read this on the way home." On the bus back, I opened the note. "You did something holy, Clara, and I know holiness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a woman kneeling in the snow when everyone else looks away. Thank you for saving more than just one man that night." That evening, I lit the candle again, but this time I set the letter next to it, not as proof, but as promise. And just as I was about to turn in for the night, the phone rang. It was the mayor's office. Apparently, they wanted to talk about something official. I had no idea what was coming. I just folded the letter from Samuel and laid it gently beside the old map when the phone rang. It was still early, the sun just beginning to cast light across the hardwood floor of my kitchen. I let it ring twice before picking up, half afraid it might be someone from the center calling to correct some misunderstanding. Instead, a voice, brisk but polite, said, "Mrs. Hale, this is the assistant to Mayor Rickards. He'd like to extend a personal invitation for you to attend the city's Veterans Recognition Ceremony this Saturday." I blinked. "Me?" "Yes, ma'am," she said, as though that question came up often. "We've arranged transportation if needed. It'll be held at Memorial Hall, starts at 6 p.m. sharp." I mumbled something like, "Thank you," and hung up, still standing by the window, coffee growing cold in my hand. I wasn't a veteran. I didn't even know anyone personally on that list except Samuel, whose face I hadn't even seen. Why was I being invited? Saturday came before I had time to talk myself out of going. I chose my navy blue coat, the one my daughter used to say made me look like an old first lady, and stepped out to the curb where a black sedan was already waiting. The driver, a quiet man in his 50s, tipped his cap, opened the door, and offered no explanation for the special treatment. The ride was smooth, but my stomach fluttered the whole way, like I'd walked into a play and forgot the lines. Outside Memorial Hall, the December air carried the weight of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Families stood in clusters, veterans in uniform, young people in pressed slacks holding camcorders and phones. I walked in slowly, expecting to be seated in the back somewhere, but as soon as I reached the lobby, a young woman with a clipboard approached me. Mrs. Clara Hale? Yes? You'll be escorted to the stage, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I had no words. Inside, the stage was modest. Red curtain, wooden lectern, rows of flags along the back. I stood behind the heavy side curtain, heart thudding in my ears. Then the mayor stepped forward, microphone in hand, and everything stilled. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, tonight we honor not just those who served with valor, but those who carried that spirit into everyday life, even without a uniform. He paused, and I thought he was going to transition to a generic speech about volunteers. Instead, a screen dropped down behind him, and there I was, caught in grainy footage, kneeling on that bitter Christmas Eve, my coat draped over a man on the ground, snow falling around me like ash. Gasps echoed. Not because it was me, but because people remembered that video. Some had shared it. Others had debated whether it was real. The mayor turned back to the crowd. We never knew her name, until now. He told them about the letters the city had received, about the veterans who'd come forward, about the community center that bore my story, quietly built from the gratitude of those who'd once been forgotten. And so, he said, voice steady, we proclaim that every Christmas Eve in our city will henceforth be known as Clara Day, a day to remember compassion, courage, and what it truly means to see the invisible. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It felt like the air had been pulled from the room. A slow, standing ovation rose like a wave from the audience. Somewhere mid-row, a child clapped without understanding, just mimicking the rhythm. I felt myself rising to my feet as if in a dream, nodding, absorbing it all. Then I saw them, at the very back. My mother, my sister, and my brother. They stood stiffly, pale, their faces unreadable in the distance. I couldn't tell if they clapped, couldn't tell if they felt regret, but they were there. And for once they weren't the ones being honored or listened to. It wasn't vindictive, it was weightless, like a burden had been passed back where it belonged. After the applause, a decorated veteran, gray hair, steady hands, walked toward me holding a small box. He opened it, and inside was a medal. Simple, unadorned, except for the engraved words, "For Civil Courage." He didn't make a speech. He just pinned it gently onto my coat and leaned in close. Not all heroes wear uniforms, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But they all know the weight of sacrifice. I smiled, though my throat tightened. I didn't do any of this for a day named after me. I'd just opened a door and left it open long enough for someone else to step through. The hall was silent for a breath. Then applause again, this time softer, almost reverent. I stepped back from the mic, hands at my side, unsure what to do next. People stood, some waved, others just watched with wet eyes. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the closing of the ceremony. But just when I thought it had all come full circle, I saw someone in the crowd. Someone I never expected to show up. The applause was still echoing off the auditorium walls when I felt it, a shift in the air, like the hush before a storm. My eyes scanned the crowd one last time before I turned to leave the stage, and that's when I saw him. At the very back of the hall, just behind the last row of chairs, stood a man. Plain coat, steel gray hair, and in his hands, a set of worn, clinking dog tags. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't even blinking, just staring, straight at me. Something about the way he held those tags made my stomach twist. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't wave, he didn't call my name. He simply stepped forward, one foot at a time, like the floor was heavier than he remembered. I froze at the edge of the stage. My mind scrambled, trying to place him. Then it hit me, like a memory I didn't realize I still had. Sunday afternoons, the sharp scent of old aftershave, laughter from the porch when I was small. Tony, I whispered to myself. He was my dad's army buddy, the one Mom said died in action, the one whose name Dad used to mutter in his sleep, Tony Rizzo, alive. He reached the first row. An usher, unsure what to do, stepped aside. Tony looked up at me, then around at the crowd. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said, his voice deep, ragged with age. "But I have something I need to say. Not tomorrow, not back home, right here." The mayor gave a slight nod. No one moved. Tony turned back to me. "Clara, your father never abandoned you. He didn't walk out on your family. He was pushed out." The room went still. Even the photographers stopped clicking. "My buddy," Tony continued, lifting the tags in his hand. He planned to leave the family business. Not for himself, but to start something. A center. For guys like me. Like him. Like the men who slept on your sidewalk. He swallowed hard. "He wasn't running from you. He was running towards something that could have saved lives." He stepped up to the edge of the stage and looked directly at my mother, who sat frozen in the second row, jaw clenched. "Your mother found out," he said, voice softer now. "And she cut him off, told him if he walked out that door to help strangers, he'd never see his kids again." I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes shifting. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like a rising tide. "She told everyone he abandoned you," Tony added. "That he was weak. But I've got his letters. I've got the signed documents, the blueprints. He wasn't weak. He just wasn't welcome anymore." I turned toward my mother. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "That's not true," she said, her voice breaking. "He could have—" "Could have what?" I said quietly. "Stayed and watched his soul rot?" I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "I wasn't the one who embarrassed this family," I told her, still standing tall. "I was the one who saved what was left of it." No one clapped. No one needed to. It was louder than any ovation. My sister looked down at her shoes. My brother shifted in his chair, jaw tight, saying nothing. And my mother, she just sat there, blinking fast, lips trembling like she might finally say something real. But the words never came. Later that week, after everything settled down, I went back to the house. It wasn't technically mine yet, not on paper, but it felt like it belonged to something bigger than all of us now. I brought a thermos of coffee, wrapped myself in a thick gray blanket, and sat on the same porch where I'd once curled up, shivering, too ashamed to cry. The air was cooler than I expected, but calm, like the town itself was holding its breath. One by one, they came. Veterans, some in uniform, most not. Some nodded, one saluted. A few just walked by, heads high. No words needed. Behind me, on the mailbox post, a new sign hung clean and simple. Porchlight Haven, Veteran Welcome Center. I traced the letters with my fingers. Tony had helped install it himself, refusing to let me lift anything heavier than a screwdriver. "You've done your lifting," he said. "Let us carry it from here." I didn't cry, not out of pride. I just didn't feel the need anymore. I watched the sun edge behind the trees. The porch creaked gently under me, like it remembered all the versions of me who'd sat there. Then I looked out and whispered what had been buried inside me for so long. When they threw me out that night, they thought they were ending my story. I paused. They didn't know. They lit the spark that started it. Have you ever lived something like this? Tell me in the comments. I read every word.